Right now, we welcome in Teo Armus, who covers Northern Virginia locally for the Washington Post on this latest. I feel like I was in the headline writing business, Teo. We just go monumental disaster. That feels like it's low hanging fruit here. Yeah.
I mean, I'll let you write that headline. I don't know if we can make quite that pointed a statement, but things are definitely looking grim for this arena plan in Richmond, especially after today.
It's not good. Maybe disaster is too strong. Well, so let me get your take on this is not really the right phrasing here. Let me get your where you think we are, your state of play here as someone who's reporting on this. Like what happened here to get us to this point? Why is it so surprising, and where does that leave us? And then we can jump off the where does that leave us and go from there.
Yeah, for sure. So, for this to happen, for the Caps and Wizards to move to Alexandria, the plan was always going to need approval and sign off from the Virginia General Assembly. And they meet for 60 days. It's a pretty rushed 60 days between January and March. And there were always really going to be sort of three ways to get it through the General Assembly. There could have been a bill starting in the House, a bill starting in the Senate, or it could have been folded into the state budget. There's this one senator who listeners might be familiar with now based off of her social media feed, Louise Lucas, who runs the Finance Committee in the Senate. And basically, she stopped the Senate bill from taking off. The House passed a bill, then it has to cross over into the Senate. She stopped that from happening too. And as of today, it seems like she has stopped the arena from ending up in the state budget as well. So basically, she's blocked all three of those avenues. And there are a couple of weird things that Governor Youngkin can potentially try and do, but it seems unlikely that he will try and do those things.
So one of those things, from my understanding, Teo, is that he can basically now call like a committee on this of some kind or debate on this of some kind, and you can make me right here, hopefully, but that it's a standalone. Like a lot of times things get done when they get put in these gigantic budgets where there's a million things and there's handshake here, you give me this, I give you that. Okay, we both get what we want, even though we said we'd never give the other person the other thing, but now we can go back to our district and be like, see, look what we did. And thus things never get done in politics, especially at the federal and state levels, single-handedly, like as single issue type of votes and debates. That is kind of now where we're at, though, with Glenn Youngkin, right? Like if he's going to do this, it's going to have to be about the stadium and not included in some larger thing unless he waits a full year.
Most likely, yeah. I mean, I think a lot of people definitely expected an arena, or maybe some people, I should say, expected an arena to come out of the budget deal because it was, the space for that bartering. This is basically something that's happening behind closed doors. It's a dozen lawmakers, and Democrats have a lot of things they want to get the okay from Youngkin on, whether that's a recreational market for marijuana or toll relief in the Hampton Roads area. That was kind of going to be where all the bartering is. And you're right there, right? That I think the avenues that are left are basically things that would require a little bit more of a standalone. And I mean, regardless of what those things are, he said at a press conference in Richmond today that, he's basically going to sort of stand down at this point. He's not really going to pursue any of the options that are left.
Why do you think that he's doing that? Like, was it the blowback? Was it, why do you think, and what did he say about why he went from having a press conference with Ted Leonsis to being like, yeah, I don't think I really want to fight for this?
I mean, it's a good question. The General Assembly session is not over. It ends on Saturday. So, I think we're going to kind of have to read the tea leaves here a little bit, but he could certainly be sort of playing a political move the same way that some Democrats could be playing a political move. And, tomorrow or the day after they do a 180 and say, actually, we've changed our minds on this. At, the press conference he had, he basically indicated that he's going to be vetoing a whole bunch of, Democratic bills, Democratic priorities. And so maybe that threat is, what he needs to get the arena through. It's kind of hard to say, and we're going to have to be watching, pretty closely over the next 48 hours or so to, really see where this goes and see what, he ultimately ends up doing.
Teo Armus, Northern Virginia reporter for the Washington Post with us talking about the Glenn Dome, as it's been called, being shot down in Richmond in the General Assembly. So there was also a report, I think from I think it was from WAMU, that Leonsis had never met with Luis Lucas until like yesterday. What role does Ted and Monumental play in the state of play right now?
Yeah, I mean, Ted and Monumental are kind of, I would say, one of the four big parties to the deal. And as such, I think they've been lobbying pretty hard in Richmond to try and get this through the General Assembly. But this is Youngkin's turf. This is Youngkin's court. And so I think Monumental, has kind of been working hand in hand with the governor's administration, to basically just convince state lawmakers, including, Senator Luis Lucas, that this is the right thing for Virginia, and the right thing for Alexandria and sort of the right thing for the state. Obviously, they have struggled to do that at this point. But I think a lot of the framing has been on Youngkin specifically because it's his venue, so to speak, right? The same way that I think if this ultimately does get to Alexandria, which is the next body that would need to vote on all this, I think the focus is going to shift away from someone like Youngkin and probably more so to the mayor of Alexandria. But we'll see if we even get to that point.
Right. It's not like if they can pull a Hail Mary here that they're actually now in the clear because a lot of the local opposition. And, I think on the Monumental side, too, which is obviously very much in focus for our audience on a sports show. Like there's convincing legislatures, there's convincing mayors, convincing those, but there's also convincing the public. What have you made of Monumental's PR campaign? Because that has been, obviously there's been some things that they've pulled back. There's been some aggressive posting and email sending and all of these things to make sure that their message, quote unquote, is getting out. Like, what have you made of that? And as someone who covers these kinds of things, have you ever seen something quite like it?
Yes and no. I think it's been really interesting because, there are political campaigns around these sorts of things all the time, right? There was an effort at one point to put a casino in Fairfax County, and I think you already sort of started to see some of the, energy from people who wanted it, from people who didn't want it. But I think what's really interesting on the Monumental side is they own a TV network, right? So they have been, running all these ads while folks are trying to watch Caps games or Wizards games, basically putting Ted or Zach Leonsis or other folks from Monumental front and center and saying, this is why this is a good deal. But Alexandria is a tricky place to do this in a lot of ways because I think the public there is so politically savvy and, so hyper engaged, and people really care about what happens in their backyard and they know politics. So it is, a thing that, maybe somewhere else it would have flown without quite as much criticism, but I think they're sort of really having to go toe to toe with a lot of neighborhood activists here.
Yeah, and it also feels like the kind of thing where if you're explaining, you're losing, and they have been doing endless explaining. Are you surprised at how, when Leonsis came out, I think it was with the interview with WUSA 9, where he's like, I'm surprised at the blowback. Are you surprised that they're surprised?
Oof. I don't think I'm surprised at the blowback, right? I write about Alexandria, that's my job, and, people there get so intense and passionate about, the color of the wall on a new development or something. But, a lot of this was kind of negotiated in secret, right? It was negotiated behind closed doors, and so to some degree, I guess it would have been impossible to know what, the reaction would have been like from the community, without going out and being public. But
what a concept, Teo.
But it's tricky, right? The way that this economic development stuff works in Virginia is really tricky, But on the other hand, right, like I said, Alexandria, these neighborhoods in particular, right, Old Town and Delray and Potomac Yard, they care about what happens in their backyard. And not that other people don't, but they care and they know how to get involved, and they will show up and make their voices heard.
I think that I think the people that you write about, Teo, would love the first segment of my show today, because that was kind of the message that if you care, you can get stuff done, and here we are, and this is what happens in a society where people don't care. Often is things get negotiated in secret, and now all of a sudden you run up against people who do care, and it's like, whoa, they care. Which leads us to let's say Virginia, and Teo Armus, Northern Virginia reporter for the Washington Post, is our guest here on the Hoffman Show. Let's say Youngkin does pull this out, that the threat of, hey, well, you're not going to give me this, you're not going to get any things that you want, I'm going to veto all of them, works. And Senator Lucas is like, you want to know what? I've talked to enough people. I actually don't think this is the worst thing, to at least let it get to a debate. Like, well, I'll let it get to this next step, and then it gets to Alexandria. What kind of roadblocks exist locally, from the politics to the logistics of what needs to happen to make this thing feasible?
Yeah, I think there are really two big questions here. The first of which is related to labor and labor unions. A lot of the Alexandria City Council is a lot smaller than the Virginia General Assembly. We're talking about 7 people instead of 140. So it's easier to convince those 7 people, but a lot of those 7 have said that if organized labor is not on board with the project, they're not going to be on board either. And as of right now, as of a couple of weeks ago, the hospitality unions and then the construction unions, have come out and basically said this deal is a bad deal for Virginia workers, for, the DC region's workers. And so I think having to sit back down with labor and hash something out that, works for all parties is definitely going to be a top priority as far as convincing, those lawmakers. I think the other big thing is there's an election happening in Alexandria. The mayor isn't running for re-election. Every seat on city council is up for re-election. And I think things, if it does get to that point, things are going to get really heated really quickly. Everyone has said that, they would expect a vote by the end of this year. So, while the current city council is still in place. But, from the very beginning, a lot of folks in Alexandria have been pushing for a referendum. And I think it would be very possible for that city council election to basically kind of turn into a sort of a de facto referendum of sorts on the arena project, just as, there's so many opinions on this and so many emotions around this as well.
That's actually a great place to end. So last question for you, Teo. I was reading the story last night that you guys had in the Post, and one line that caught my eye was that there are some Virginia legislators who basically think it's wrong to pull these teams out of D.C., that the blowback, not just locally in Alexandria, but the blowback from the region and specifically in the district, and how things went down here with Bowser, and it felt like very middle of the night, like secretive, and you're kind of pulling the city game out of the city. All of those things into one giant bucket, but it leads to some concern for some Virginia legislators. How wide is that concern, and is that a type of thing that could be overcome if they just kind of think this is all wrong to begin with?
Yeah. I think that's a great question. It's not something we've heard from every single state lawmaker by any means, but I think it's definitely something we've heard from at least a handful. I mean, Arlington, Alexandria, Fairfax, it's not a different country, right? I mean, the DC region is really well integrated, and folks are crossing the river all the time and, working in DC and living in Northern Virginia or vice versa. And so I think, some lawmakers do ultimately feel a little bit responsible for what happens to the district, because their constituents are people who come into the district all the time. As to how widespread that is, Virginia is a big state. There's a lot of people who are in Richmond and are not from Northern Virginia, and I think that's where things start to get a little bit more complicated. But it's not something you can count out by any means.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting, and I'm glad someone's responsible for the district, because we don't have anybody representing us, but that's a whole different radio show. Teo Armus with us here on the Hoffman Show. Teo, great insight as always. I'm sure, depending on what happens in the next 48 hours, maybe we'll talk to you very, very soon, but I'm sure as more developments come in, we'll have you back on the show.
Yeah, we'll see what happens. Thank you so much for having me.
You got it. That's Teo Armus, everybody.
Hey, this is DA, and you're listening to The Hoffman Show on the Team 980 and the Odyssey app.